Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're all having a good day. In today's episode, we're going to fly over the hill and continue our floating island project, but as you'll immediately see, I've made a couple of changes to it and added some details. Now, these are just small things. They are not quite as comprehensive as I expected to make in terms of changes on this thing, because I was thinking we probably need to neaten up some of these faceted sections of the island where it looks a little bit jumbly. But honestly, having looked at it from specific angles, it really all blends together into something that's a lot more coherent than I expected. Like if I'm looking at the island from this angle, for example, all of that really seems to work in context. It feels like it's part of the plates of the material of the island that we've put together here, and even if it looks weird from one angle, it looks better from another angle, and so I feel like I don't want to change it too much, otherwise I disturb the picture of what's going on from this side. But what I have done, as you can see, is layer in a couple of veins of material. And I wanted to build one of these together on camera so you can get an idea of what exactly I'm doing. I've done them around the front here, but the sides and the back are yet to be touched by this stuff. And underneath, though it's a little difficult to spot because of the shadows that are at play here, I've also started to replace some of the lower material with materials that are from lower down in the world. I've got some darker materials that naturally are part of those lower layers of the world. There's a little bit of tuff layered in down here as a sort of rock formation that is extending down a little bit, kind of giving the impression that there are stalactites growing there, and also a patch of deepslate, which is a little difficult to work with because deepslate is a rotatable block, and natural deepslate is probably the best way of using this. Like, we could use cobbled deepslate for that and it wouldn't look too weird, but I think the strata of the deepslate block, the layers that it has, feel quite natural, except unfortunately when you place it against a side of a block, it rotates the texture and you're looking at the top face there and the lines end up being vertical instead of horizontal. So I have purposefully not lit up too much of that because once we light it up, we'll be able to see how some of those blocks are at different angles. But we're going to do some lighting a little bit later on to bring that out of the shadow and to be able to see a bit more of the texture where right now it is obscured by the darkness. The idea, though, is that we're using tuff and deepslate on the lower half, not just because they are darker, shadowier textures, but also because if this island had been pulled out of the ground, those are materials that come from lower down in the ground, and so it makes sense for the lower half of the island to have more of those in its construction, simply because of what we know about the strata of the world of Minecraft. Like, in Minecraft, in the fiction of this world, that feels like a more realistic detail, or as much as realism can apply to one of these floating islands anyway. So, moving on past the Wandering Trader, I'm going to come around the side here, we're going to grab some scaffolding, and we're going to pillar up to somewhere approximating the side of this island. I guess probably about here seems good. And we don't want to start these right at the top necessarily. I want to leave a couple of blocks of stone in between the grass layer and these veins of diorite and calcite that we're going to be building. But what we need for this is some calcite blocks, some diorite blocks, and even some blocks of andesite here and there. And what we're going to do, we're going to bridge out in a couple of different directions with the scaffolding, so we have access to a fairly broad area of this here. And then we're going to break out a couple of these blocks, starting with the ones that are on the outside of these faces here, the ones that might catch the light if a sunbeam was to come down in a particular direction. And we're going to replace a couple of the stone blocks here with calcite. Obviously, we might end up displacing a couple of the torches on the inside, so that's something I'm going to stay aware of as I do this. But we're going to be building these in a sort of winding arc. There's one of the torches there. We'll probably bring this in slightly, like so, and maybe finish the vein around there. And so we've got this flowing S-curve almost of calcite that we're drawing around the outside. And now we're going to connect all of those up with the diorite blocks. So the calcite has provided the shape of the vein. The diorite is just here for additional detail and connecting things up. And we're only going to replace a couple of these as we go as well. We're not doing a giant sort of paintbrush brush stroke here. We are just connecting up the calcite blocks here and there. Because whenever you look at strata like this in real-world geology, whenever you look at veins of material that have formed like this, they're always going to be relatively thin, so we don't want to over-egg it here and make it really large. And we are not building veins of diorite that you would find out there in the natural terrain of Minecraft. Diorite always generates in these kind of blobs so that you can acquire a large amount of it as you are caving. But in natural geology, we would often find that Veins like this are going to form in natural sort of narrow streaks in the rock, or they're going to form the entirety of the rock itself, which kind of defeats the point of building it in a vein here. And so stepping back from that, we now have a streak of diorite and calcite built into the side of this, and around the outside of the diorite pieces here and there, we might add a couple more in, maybe one right there. We could maybe branch this off in a couple of additional directions if we wanted to, but then we're going to switch to blocks of andesite, and at the edges of some of these diorite blocks, continuing the line of the vein, we're just going to add in a couple of pieces of andesite, because those are still lighter than the stone around them, but in very subtle ways, so it feels like the kind of crystallization, the quartzy element that makes up the diorite and the andesite is going to be there, but in a much more subtle way, and in a way that blends with the stone around it much more successfully. I've added another block of diorite up there, so it's getting a little close to the edge of the island, but not quite touching it. Added a few andesite blocks around it. We'll maybe add one more in here, and at this point, I think we're done. We're not going to tinker with that too much more. The idea is to make these details quickly and effectively. So gathering up all my stone and scaffolding from the ground, we can step back and take a look at the overall picture we've just created with this vein of diorite, and yeah, I think I'm quite happy with that. Actually, it looks quite nice. One thing we could do is maybe tuck it behind one of these stone layers and just have some of the diorite connect with the stone layer in front of it, just to see if that looks like the streak of material could continue and connect up to this vein on the other side. But that feels like an optional detail. It's kind of trivial at this point, and this isn't the face of the island we'll be seeing most often. But I want to add in a few details like this as we go, just so it feels like this is a much more realistic piece of terrain, and that also adds highlights which distract from how blocky everything else is. I mentioned in the previous video that one of the reasons this looks so blocky and so kind of jumbled and potentially not that pleasing to the eye is because it's all made out of the same material, and so the only contrast that gets created here is in the light and shadows that the game applies with the lighting engine. But I think one of the things we can do with adding in these highlights is distract the eye and give the eye some more interesting stuff to focus on, which draws our attention away from the blocky jigsaw that we see elsewhere in the build. So I'm going to be adding a few more details like that as I go. I also want to add a little bit to this side as well, and we could even include some other materials. I talked about making some of these spikes out of dripstone, but I don't have a great deal of dripstone blocks right now, so I might need to go away and harvest some of those. I don't have enough pointed dripstone being manufactured to make the blocks en masse. But underneath here I have added a couple of extra spikes, and once again those are for the same reason as the veins of diorite. We're dangling them down from below. They are in fairly simplistic blocky shapes. I've made larger areas of material kind of drop down, and then just a single spike of stone coming down from that, and once again that smooths out the texture of the underside of the island here, gives us a few details to focus on so that the other jumblier sections of blocks will blend into the background. This kind of contextual detail I think is one of the reasons Minecraft's terrain looks like terrain in the first place. We can read some of the environment around us as a hill or a mountain or a valley or something like that, instead of just this weird jumble of blocks that don't look very good because of little details like the changes in biome when the hillside over there transitions into a snowy slopes biome, or the grass and flowers that grow around here, or the forests that break your line of sight. Details like that can really help terrain like this feel a lot less jumbled when you put it together for the first time. You might think, oh, it just looks like a shamble, a mess of blocks, and it looks all kind of zigzaggy and checkerboardy. We don't need to worry as much about that once we've added a few details. So like I said in the previous video, push through and see where the project is a little bit later once you've added some of those textural details. Later on I am going to be adding the boat to the top of the island, and we're going to start terraforming the top half of the island, which is currently just a flat section of grass. But before we do that, I want to work a little bit on the lighting of the underside, just so we can look at what texture we've got there and see how that can be improved. And to do that, we're going to head back over to the base, and we're going to whip up a very simple, very temporary Glow Lichen farm. In fact, I don't know if I actually have any Glow Lichen blocks anywhere. I don't think they have a permanent place in my storage system. I've been keeping the organic blocks in kind of a mishmash of different places, and so I don't think Glow Lichen has found a permanent home yet. Well, maybe we can change that, but I do need to go and acquire a couple of samples of it if I don't have any in storage. We have one piece of Glow Lichen here in my organic materials chest right here. Of course, we could go and shear some out of nearby caves. I'm fairly certain that we'd find some if we did a little bit of caving in this area, but one should be enough because glow lichen can be grown using bone meal. And thanks to us starting off with a skeleton farm as our first XP grinder, we do have a great deal of bone blocks, so we can break a bunch of these down into bone meal and use them to start a farm. I also have a ton of bone blocks in my ender chest actually from the mob farm, but I'm going to tuck away all of this other stuff from my inventory just so we have that handy when we want to continue building the island, but for now we have a bit more space to work. And let's talk about glow lichen mechanics, which are pretty simple actually. Glow lichen can be placed on any face of any solid block, so right here we can place it on the ground. It can also be placed on ceilings and walls. Breaking down some bone blocks into bone meal, if we bone meal the glow lichen, it will grow in a random cardinal direction as long as that is not already occupied by glow lichen or another block. So in this case, if I bone meal this 4 times, it grows out in all 4 directions, and I'm fairly certain the direction it chooses is entirely random. But once we've grown out a patch about this size, I'm going to grab my shears, which have efficiency 4 and mending, and it should be pretty much instantaneous to break the glow lichen and collect it all. But shears are necessary to harvest glow lichen. It can't be harvested even using silk touch tools, even the ones that are often a substitute for what shears can do. With the right combination of redstone components, we can farm glow lichen a lot faster than this. Thanks to a useful property of glow lichen, it can grow within the same block space, and it will grow up to 3 pieces, like so. In fact, it could probably grow more than that if we had another block here. It would grow up on that side as well. But you can harvest all 3 of these as though they were a single block using shears, and it will drop 3 glow lichen. We got 31 in there. We're picking that up. We get 34. So over here alongside our organic farms, I think I'll probably pop it down here for now, but we might end up moving it a bit later because this farm is going to be a little temporary. We're going to put dispenser number 1 in the ground right here. We're going to put 2 blocks to either side of that, like so, and then we're going to put dispensers 2 and 3, like so. Then I'm going to go back to my box of materials so I can grab any type of material that can be turned into buttons. We'll use stone for this one since that'll blend nicely with the components here, and we're going to place a button on any surface that we do not want the glow lichen to grow to, which is going to include the sides and top of these dispensers. We're going to cover at least one of the faces of these 2 dispensers with glow lichen. We might as well do all 3 of them at this point, but bear in mind that that bottom dispenser does need to be filled with bone meal. We could have a hopper feeding into it from one side, but in this case I'm just going to put the bone meal in manually. We won't need all of that for what we need to do today. We will, however, need 2 more stacks of bone blocks so that we can fill up the other 2 dispensers. So that's 9 stacks for that one and 9 stacks for this one. And then we're going to connect all of these up using redstone wire. Simply breaking out this block here and placing a redstone dust at the bottom of that hole will power the dispenser underneath there, since we're powering the dirt block adjacent to it with the plus shape that the redstone dust leaves behind. We're going to place a block above that, and we're going to place some redstone dust on top of that, which should in turn activate the 2 dispensers adjacent to it, that one and that one. To power these, we're going to put 2 observers facing into each other for a very simple observer clock. We're going to place that one facing that way, and then this one facing this way, and you'll hear that it regularly outputs a tick indicating that the dispensers are being powered. We're going to put a sticky piston right here that's going to pull one of these observers out of the circuit, allowing us to shut it off. Partly so we can hear ourselves think and not have to worry about the constant ticking of these dispensers, but also because when you reinsert the observer into the circuit, that will actually work a lot faster. And now all I have to do is stand here with some efficiency enchanted shears, turn on the circuit, and simply hold down the left click button, and you can see this basically becomes a fountain of glow lichen. All 3 of these dispensers are being powered basically as fast as they can be, and what that means is that these 2 dispensers feed the glow lichen down onto these blocks to either side here, and the 3rd dispenser bone meals those pieces of glow lichen, spreading it to the face in front of the dispenser. That means every time we harvest anything from this block with the shears, we are harvesting 3 glow lichen at a time. I'm going to drop off all of these redstone components and stuff in here. We'll get any other blocks out of my inventory, and we won't have any glow lichen in the inventory as well. Watch how quickly we are able to harvest glow lichen once we have this contraption up and running. There we go, that's 1 full stack. a second or two later, we have a second full stack, and it will keep going from there. Now, naturally, this is going to tear through the durability of your shears, so it's a good idea to have mending or unbreaking on these to make sure that they can be repaired and that they last a little longer. Since I'm right here next to the melon and pumpkin farm, that's a pretty handy reminder that we can get some pretty easy XP from these villagers simply by trading some melons and pumpkins to the farmer. So a couple of trades later, our shears are mostly repaired. Yep, there we go, we've managed to get them fully repaired, so we can harvest Glow Lichen to our heart's content at this stage. But now, I already have about 5 or 6 stacks of it. I think we should be good enough to head over to the floating island and apply that to the underside. And the first place I'm going to do that is over here in this alcove, which is the only place I put a torch in this whole thing, because there was a ledge here that could potentially spawn mobs. We're going to remove that, and we're going to place some Glow Lichen here instead, which will do the same job, but with a little bit more of an ambient feel to the lighting. And Glow Lichen can effectively be used here as an overlay texture for some of the stone types, making it easier to blend two different stone types together if we don't like the obvious join between the two textures, but also to add a third type of stone in here if we wanted to make it feel like there was a vein of some other material growing around here. If we step back and take a look at this, there we go. That area is now successfully lit up. We can see where the join between the tuff and the stone is. What I'm also hoping is that if we use it judiciously here, one of the things it can do is help distract from the differences in direction between the different blocks of deep slate here. Even if we're not covering every single piece of deep slate in this arrangement here, what this can do is allow the eye to be drawn to the highlights in here, which can give the deep slate around it a bit more room to breathe. On the other hand, now that I can see that a little better, I actually don't mind that a few of the textures in there are going in different directions. It kind of feels like the stone has a rough-hewn dynamic feel to it, which I don't hate entirely. It's certainly not going to look all that bad from a distance either. And I do like having a gentle glow from the underside of the island here instead of that really high contrast shadow. It does help a little bit in the mystical feel of the island as well, as though the island isn't necessarily flying of its own volition. It has some kind of magical energy holding it up. The glow from below can really help with that, and I think we'll put a bit more Glow Lichen around the underside of the island to enhance that and also add a bit of texture as we add in some more deep slate and tuff formations. We still want to have some shadow under here from the lighting engine, but we also want to have a bit more control over what the material does for the shadows, so I think it makes sense. We'll add some more Glow Lichen to the underside of this, and then when we come back, we'll start working on the position of the ship up there on the surface of the island. So to begin with, we're going to set up a larger platform of dirt over the top here because, of course, we don't want the ship to be just resting on the ground at the same level as everything else. We do want it to be raised up ever so slightly back from the center line of the island, which is this line here. So we want to go back a few blocks. We're going to build up a larger dirt platform, and we're going to blend that into the rest of the terrain of the island as we go. But first of all, we're just going to establish a nice large dirt platform with a couple of pieces of grass that will simply spread, allowing us to use more dirt than grass and saving on the minimal amount of grass that we have left. In the meantime, I've also been back to my creative world where we built the mock-up of the boat in the first place, and I've taken a bunch of screenshots from different angles. If you have the know-how, you could also choose to import this into a world where you can take the ship build apart block by block and work from it from there and just kind of slice up different sections of it so that you can take more detailed screenshots and not have to memorize how the entire thing is constructed. But I'm confident enough that these screenshots will give me enough information to go on, and at the very least I should be able to count out the sections that I built so that I don't make too many mistakes constructing this in survival. The other thing I'll have to make sure I do is once again hop underneath here and place some torches to make sure that we light this up, because this is going to be another hollow section of the island and we don't want too many mobs spawning down here. And now that we have this dirt platform, it's 15 blocks wide for now. We can widen it a couple of blocks on either side if we want to, and we're not going to be using the entirety of one end of this. It's going to be curved inward thanks to the fact that the bow of the ship is curved inward as well, so we don't need to worry too much if it overhangs the corners of the island. This could also be an interesting opportunity to change the shape of the island as it rises up here and add a few rock formations on top to blend this platform of terrain in with some of the grassland that we've got here and the rock of the island below. But we're not going to worry too much about that yet. Our first task is to get the ship in and looking correct. So for those purposes, I brought a shulker box with a decent amount of logs in it. We're obviously going to be using a lot of oak logs for the frame and then spruce wood for the panels and the sides and a few spruce logs here and there, plus the mangrove logs that we need for the masts. And the center of our island is about here, so that's where I'm going to place the first oak log of the frame of the ship. I'm going to build that up a couple more blocks so it's obvious which one is our center log, and then I'm just going to map out the first layer of blocks around here so that we can make sure that we've got the size of the ship right before we go ahead and add in any more details. And this is kind of similar to the wireframing process that we used to build the floating island. Okay, yeah, looks like we do need to add another row or so of dirt behind here. There should be, yeah, one more row that we need so that we can hit the opposing side of this platform with the opposite side of the ship. And there we go, that is the footprint of our ship and the footprint of the landmass that we're going to have to blend in with the rest of this island. But I think it looks pretty good. Let's take a quick check from over here on the distant mountaintop, and this is obviously where we're going to be seeing the ship from a lot of the time. And yeah, seeing it above the island there, obviously with some land connecting it and bits and pieces around it, I think that's going to look pretty spectacular. But since you folks have already seen the construction of the ship in creative, it's going to be constructed much the same in survival, just without all of the flying around. So I'm going to do this on a live stream, and when we come back, hopefully we'll have made enough progress that we can add in a few more details and start to blend this with the land below. Okay, it's time for a progress update. The ship is taking shape. It's looking a little bit weird right now since it's still hovering off the platform of the floating island and doesn't have any of the terrain built up around it. So right now it looks kind of deeper than it should do. It looks a little bit weird and distended, but that will change. And thanks to some feedback from folks in the previous episode, I have extended the height of the masts a little bit. I thought that was going to be a good change. It does look a little strange, but I also kind of love the fact that there are clouds going through the top area. It's almost as though the clouds are the sails and they're kind of attaching themselves to the ship as they go. The rigging looks a little bit weird with the taller masts, but I'm kind of happy with it for now, and the addition of grindstones around the outside was a really good one. Now, I've started putting in a bit of detail into the deck. So naturally, we have the foredeck here where it kind of slopes up towards the bow of the ship. The main deck right here between the foremast and the mainmast, kind of surrounding that, and with an archway that's going to lead through into a cabin area and a place to get down into the hold of the ship. I also might have one over here on this side, just like a little staircase down, so that there's more than one way to get to and from the hold. Plus, of course, we have some trapdoors here, which aren't really arranged in any kind of natural feeling pattern. Like maybe we could break out these central too, so it feels like these are just surrounded and can flip down in the right orientations. But I like the idea of being able to get stuff out of the hold just by lowering it down or pulling it up through the central trapdoor area. And of course, as we get up towards the aft here, it kind of extends upwards into this deck at the back where, as I mentioned before, we would have the helm probably somewhere around here. I'm not sure how much sense that technically makes for the running of the ship, but of course we don't actually have a rudder here or anything. There is no tiller, anything that would be attached to the back of the ship to move the rudder, so we don't need to worry too much about realism. In fact, realism has not been my goal for the entirety of this. I just want something that looks good from a distance, and as long as it looks vaguely like a ship, I'm not too worried about getting the anatomy of these ships 100% correct. There are some people who are going to strive for realism in Minecraft, and I think that's a noble goal in itself, but I think for certain types of builders, just the general sense of something, as long as it's got the right sort of vibes, that will often do, especially if it's meant to be seen from a distance and not scrutinized up close. With the level of detail we can achieve in Minecraft, sometimes that's just as good as having something that is super realistic. And a lot of people have been asking if I have any other goals for this besides just building something that looks cool from a distance. Like, am I going to turn this into a mob farm or a villager trading hall or anything like that? And right now, my answer to that is no, but I'm giving myself permission to change that later if I decide that this would be a good place to have some sort of farm. For the moment, though, I have a lot more rope work to do. I need to build some of the sails, I need to get a few extra bits in, and I need to seal off these areas of the main deck. I think below decks, I might leave for now since it's not going to be all that visible from the outside, and my main goal here is to have something that looks good at a distance. From there, of course, we have to connect to the platform that the ship is built on to the surrounding island, and we might end up altering the proportions of the island slightly since while I thought we were going to have enough room here, it does feel like it sits a little close to the island. So maybe we'll continue one cliff of the island up and it can be slightly irregular in its formation, but will support the ship a little better. Either way, there's still lots more to do, so I'm going to go ahead and get some more done, and I'll see you folks on the other side. And not too long after that, dramatic reveal. We haven't done the sails yet. I've been putting off the sails because working with that amount of wool on that kind of scale is going to be a bit of a pain, but we've got a bit more landscape blending the ship with the ground below. And it might look a little different from here than it looks from an angle as well. Let me take you out of cinematic camera mode and we can look up here a little bit, because as you can see, the landscape doesn't reach quite to the edges of the island. We're looking at it from a very flat view over there, so it's kind of difficult to see the topography of the island, but I have done a couple of fairly deliberate things to make sure it looks like it does from over there. The first thing is that I've not done anything at all to the back of the island. As you might expect, the back is not yet done. And obviously there are jokes in the Minecraft community about this, especially around the folks on Hermitcraft who freely admit to not decorating the backs of their builds sometimes, but truly that is because from over there, you would not really know the difference. And that's part of the strategy you can use in your Minecraft worlds to cut down on the amount of time it takes to do a project. If it's up against a wall or a cliff, or if it's somewhere that you know you're not going to look at the back of it all that much, it's going to look the same from whatever viewpoint you decide to set up, regardless of whether the back is done or not. So I think it's kind of important actually to lift the lid on that discussion a little bit, just to point out that sometimes it doesn't necessarily matter whether you do the back or not. If you want a fully 3D immersive world, or you want to do it just for the sake of your own, sense of completion on the project and sense of closure, then that's totally fine. And I will end up doing this because inevitably I'm going to be flying around this at some point, and I don't want to leave that to do for later. But I also thought, since there are 3D elements to this, and since we're working from a 2D inspirational image, we can put in some elements that aren't necessarily in the original. Like, I could build a cave underneath here if I wanted to, and potentially we can stash some pirate loot underneath the ship itself, but that is, of course, all about what we do after we are done with the main bulk of this project, and I don't know if it's within the scope of the project right now to do that for this build. I think I'm probably going to get tired of doing this build by next week and want to move on to something else, so maybe we'll save the cave for another time. Either way, we now have this cliff that is supporting the ship on either side, and you'll notice that the rock face wraps around the side of the ship on this side and on that side to give the impression that the ship actually curves upwards and that the sides of the ship aren't just straight down touching the ground, because of course a ship that's sailing out there on the water would have a curved hull, and so it makes a lot more sense for the ship to feel like it has a curve to it, even if that's not necessarily how we have built it. One of the things that was most important in designing this cliff was disrupting the straight line of this grass platform that I built the ship on in the first place, and so in some areas we have moss hanging down over the sides of the island here. In some cases we have rocks jutting up from that flat line of grass blocks, and in this case I've even included some rooted dirt and some hanging roots which you can get by bone mealing the rooted dirt. They will always grow from underneath. You can even shear those and move them around, so I have one attached to the underside of a grass block and one attached to a stone block here to give the impression that there are plants that have burrowed their roots through the rock and the roots are dangling out of the other side. I've also added in some scenery in front of this cliff, which once again blends a little bit once you're looking at it from further away, but in front of the cliff here it adds a little bit of dynamism to the landscape, and I'm going to be messing around with, once again, the flat grass line of everything around the edge of the island, just to make sure that it feels a bit more natural. Like here, we already got some moss sloping down over the side and rounding the edge of the island a little bit. We might add a couple of areas where it goes up vertically a little bit and a couple of areas where it dangles over the side some more, but that's going to be a way to randomize in a way the natural edge of the island and make it feel a little bit more natural in the process. On this side over here, I've even incorporated some prismarine and diorite, so instead of the rocks that we have going around the edge over there, on this side it looks a little bit more like sea foam and a couple of waves over the edges of the ship here, kind of as though to give the impression that the aft of this ship is leaving a wake behind it, or that the ship is moving through water still, but not throughout the entire build. I kind of liked including that as a detail and making it look like it was part of the rock formations of the island itself by incorporating it into the cliff down below here, and it's almost like a coincidence that it's formed up in the shape of waves around the boat. I kind of like that for the fiction of this island. Now we've included some bushes and whatnot around here as well with birch leaves, since those have a nice neutral green color. It's not too bright, it doesn't blend with the moss, allows it to stand out against the moss, and also allows it to incorporate with the side of the ship a little better, which is what it's doing over here. For lighting, we have a bit of Glow Lichen. I haven't really gone around with torches and hidden any lighting or anything yet, but eventually we want to have this whole area lit up simply because Enderman will come along and steal some of the blocks if I don't, so that's something to bear in mind. And the last thing I really wanted to talk about was the fact that I've covered this entire hillside in moss, or at least edged it in moss. We can see that there are grass blocks throughout the rest of this, but I have put moss on most of the blocks leading up to the ship here, give or take a couple of dirt blocks that I thought I would leave out for contrast. And the main reason I put moss along the edges here is because the green texture wraps around to the sides, and when seen from a distance, if I look at it from my hillside over here, all of the grass blocks before were basically giving the impression of a brown block from a distance, with the occasional hint of green involved there. And the problem with that was that there was a brown slope up to the ship that was more or less the same color as the wood of the ship itself. And while we could create a little bit of contrast with the materials of the ship if we changed up the texture of the hull of the ship itself, it made a lot more sense to coat the hillside in green so that it was obvious there was green terrain leading up to this. It felt a bit more natural and it felt a bit closer to what the original inspirational image we picked out had in place. And while I'm really happy with how this looks overall at this point, we do still need to go through and do a detail pass. We need to add the sails, we need to add a little bit of texture here and there, and a couple of objects on the deck of the ship that will help it feel a little bit more natural. And I do need to do something about these flatter areas of grass to introduce a bit more interest and make it feel a little bit less like there is just a flat circle or an arc of grass at the front of the island. As I've been bone mealing some of the spots around here, I've been removing flowers quite deliberately so that we can have some more control over what colors are present here. I think I might add some blue flowers around here to reintroduce blue where you might expect it around the ship, but of course the ship is landlocked here, so I wanted to reintroduce some kind of watery theme. I might even have a little waterfall here leading into a pond or something like that, and that would complete the image of whatever this staircase of grass that's coming down on either side is surrounding here. A few more boulders and rocky patches like this are going to give the impression that the terrain of the island does not stop simply because it reaches a flat top to it. I think it's going to be good to have a few more rocks and whatnot around here, and occasionally we might lift up some of the edges of the island so that they form a sharper line of cliffs or something that feels like a little bit more defensible, a little bit more like a rocky fort of some kind. But folks, that is where we're going to leave this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you've enjoyed a few more of these details coming together, and finally we have the ship attached to the island, and it is feeling good to me. Thank you so much, folks. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care. Bye for now.